Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. Today we're looking at a game that was made because I needed a break from making a game. So before we jump into just what the heck that means, remember to leave a like if you enjoy the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And remember to turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. So before we get into things, it's story time. Now, a while back we showcased a game called A Dog in the Dark. The unfinished project was a first attempt at creating an infinite procedurally generated world. And since then I've wanted to expand and improve on that concept, which was the original purpose of today's project. However, due to technical issues, it became quickly apparent that this was going to be a larger undertaking than anticipated. And during this time, I was also simultaneously working on the recent April Fool's project, so time and unfortunately patience were limited. So in order to keep the vibes positive this week, just know that the spirit of the project still lives on in this simpler state, and perhaps someday we'll return to it down the road to fit it with those original plans. Now, the point of today's project was to tackle traversal over a large body of land and trying to diversify the gameplay along the way. So generally speaking, we're working with a top-down action game setup. However, this time around the player actually has two states. The first state is their default walk state, which allows the player to move with WASD and fire their rocket launcher with left click. While in this state, the player's movement is pretty slow, but they are armed with a powerful projectile weapon that, yes, will also explode and cause AoE damage to any nearby units, including the player. The player's second state is their row state. Not only is the player roughly 4 times faster, but the controls are a lot less reliable. See, while in this row state, the player is unable to stop moving, though a direction can be determined using WASD. The change in state also affects the player's weapon of choice, which trades that powerful rocket launcher for a quick-firing, albeit weaker, laser beam. And unlike the rocket projectile, which requires a confirmed collision with their target, any enemies caught in the laser's line of sight are instantly damaged. Now, speaking of enemies, there are 2 types to dispatch in this wasteland of sand that, as far as the eye can see. The first is a projectile-based entity that will attempt to snipe the player when within range, and both enemies will patrol around until in attack range. But our second enemy type takes their job of destroying the player very seriously, because when within distance, our second enemy will begin to chase the player, and while chasing the player, they enter a faster, deadlier state. Then, while near enough to the player while in chase mode, they will begin a countdown. If still within range of the player when that countdown reaches 0, they will detonate, causing an explosion similar to that of the player's rockets. So this presents the player with 2 drastically different ways to approach their combat scenarios. Go with the slower, more powerful approach, or hit turbo and become a rolling ball of doom lasers. While on foot, the player is powerful, but will eventually be unable to outrun or outgun their foes. So rolling will give the player more movement options, but also require a bit more precision with the weaker laser. And so you may be able to see where the infinite procedural generation idea would have come into play here. With the ability to move so fast, being able to utilize that in an infinitely expanding world seemed like a pretty cool idea. And honestly, the ability to switch between combat and traversal on the fly is something I personally wanted to mess with in a game for a while now. And fun fact, the trail left in the sand was actually pretty important. Without the trail, it was very difficult to keep track of where in this finite world the player was, making the whole thing really disorientating. So yeah, while the original idea would have been awesome to pull off, this proof of concept was far from a disappointing consolation prize. And so I want to know, what do you think is the best example of a game that makes traversal between on foot and, say, a vehicle interesting? And heck, if you can't think of any, which games have you played do you think could have benefited from having an interesting distinction between on foot combat and combat in other forms of transportation? Leave any and all thoughts in the comments. And finally, if you enjoy what I do here, supporting me on Patreon will help me keep doing it. You can also net yourself some cool exclusive content and game downloads, and even early access to the weekly videos before they're released on YouTube. And with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.